You came back. Good. Pull up a chair and try not to make a sound. This is the last whisper. At 2:17 in the morning, a security camera inside a locked medical sleep lab captured a man sitting completely still in a glass room. To the staff watching from the hallway, he looked calm. His eyes were open, his hands were folded, and his breathing was slow. But when they finally opened the door, they found one sentence scratched into the plastic table in front of him. The letters were crooked, shallow, and repeated over and over until the words became almost unreadable. "Get me out of the seconds." That sentence did not make sense to anyone at first. It sounded like a panic attack. It sounded like drugs. It sounded like a man losing his mind under fluorescent lights after too many hours without sleep. Then the lab recovered the audio from the room, slowed it down, cleaned it up, and matched it to the movement of his lips. The man had not been silent. He had been begging for help for 6 hours. The man was Daniel Mercer, 34 years old, a night shift package sorter from Portland. He was the kind of person most people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. He lived alone, paid his rent late but always paid it, answered emails with one sentence, and kept a cheap wall calendar in his kitchen with only 2 things written on it: rent due and sleep study. Daniel had signed up for the study because the clinic paid $800 for one overnight session. The ad said researchers were testing a new audio-based treatment for chronic insomnia. No surgery, no needles, no drugs. Just a controlled room, a set of headphones, a few brain scans, and a long night of monitored rest. The clinic was called Northline Cognitive Sleep Center. It occupied the 6th floor of a renovated office building beside the river. During the day, the lobby looked expensive and boring, all white walls, frosted glass, and potted plants that were almost certainly fake. At night, with the rest of the building empty, the place felt less like a clinic and more like a place designed to keep secrets comfortable. Daniel arrived at 9:40 p.m. He was tired, underpaid, and in a good mood because the check would cover his overdue power bill. A young technician named Mara clipped sensors to his temples and wrists. She explained that the treatment used layered sound frequencies to guide the brain through sleep cycles. Daniel joked that if the machine could make him sleep for more than 3 hours, he would marry it. Mara smiled, but she did not laugh. That was the first detail investigators noticed later. Everyone else at the clinic spoke like the study was routine. Mara behaved like she was waiting for a storm she had already seen on radar. Before the session began, Daniel was placed in room C, a small chamber with a bed, a plastic table, a wall clock, and an observation window facing the control desk. The room had no sharp corners. The door locked from the outside because participants sometimes wandered during sleep studies. The staff described it as standard safety protocol. At 10 p.m., the sound program began. For the first 20 minutes, nothing unusual happened. Daniel lay on the bed with the headphones over his ears. His heart rate dropped. His breathing slowed. On the monitor, his brain activity shifted in a clean, beautiful pattern. The doctor on duty, Dr. Hale, said it looked like the cleanest induction they had ever captured. Then Daniel opened his eyes. He did not sit up quickly. He moved with careful slowness, as if the air had thickened around him. He stared at the wall clock for almost a full minute. Then he lifted one hand, palm facing his own face, and watched his fingers curl. Mara asked through the speaker, "Daniel, can you hear me?" Daniel turned his head toward the observation glass. His mouth opened. No sound came through. At the control desk, the staff thought the microphone had failed. Mara checked the feed. The microphone was working. It was picking up the hum of the ventilation system, the soft scrape of Daniel's hospital socks on the floor, even the tiny plastic tick of the clock hand. It was not picking up Daniel's voice because his voice had become too slow. That fact was discovered much later. In the moment, Dr. Hale assumed Daniel was confused. He told Mara to pause the audio treatment. She did. Daniel kept staring at them through the glass. He lifted his hand again and pointed at the clock. The second hand had moved only once since he woke up. To the staff, 1 second had passed. To Daniel, based on what he later managed to communicate, that single second had stretched into nearly 4 minutes. The treatment had not put him to sleep. It had changed his relationship with time. At first, the staff did not understand how bad it was. Daniel could move, but every movement demanded a level of patience no human mind is built to survive. Raising his arm took as long as an entire argument. Turning his head felt like waiting for ice to melt. Blinking became a gamble because closing his eyes meant trapping himself in darkness until his eyelids opened again. Mara entered the room at 10:09 p.m. to remove the headphones. Daniel flinched when she touched him, not because it hurt, but because he had watched her hand approach for what felt like half an hour. The fingertips reached his temple, one impossible inch at a time. By the time she pulled the headphones off, Daniel was crying without making a sound. Dr. Hale decided to keep him under observation. That decision destroyed him. The doctor believed the episode would fade on its own. The contract Daniel signed allowed them to monitor temporary neurological reactions as long as vital signs stayed stable. His pulse was elevated but not dangerous. His blood pressure was high but manageable. From the outside, he looked frightened, exhausted, and strangely still. From the inside, every minute in that room was becoming an empty hallway that stretched for days. By 10:30 p.m., Daniel had learned one thing with absolute certainty. Boredom could become physical. He was not bored the way a person gets bored in a waiting room. This was heavier. It gathered behind his eyes. It pressed against the front of his skull. The room offered him 4 objects to study: a bed, a table, a clock, and the reflection of his own face in the glass. He counted the pores on his hands. He memorized tiny scratches in the floor. He watched dust turn in the air like tiny planets. When Mara gave him a marker and asked him to write how he felt, Daniel tried. The marker moved too slowly. His thoughts ran so far ahead of his body that each letter became a construction project. The first word took what felt like an afternoon. Wrong. That was all he managed before his hand cramped. Mara understood enough to panic. She told Dr. Hale they needed to call emergency neurology. Hale refused. He said outside involvement would shut the study down before they knew what they were seeing. His exact words, recorded by the hallway camera, were, "This is a breakthrough reaction. Keep him calm." Daniel heard none of that. Voices had already dropped below his hearing. Human speech no longer sounded like language. It arrived as deep tremors through the walls, long waves of pressure that made the room feel like it was surrounded by sleeping giants. The fluorescent lights flickered at a speed he could see. Each flicker stretched into a sunrise, a noon, and a dying white dusk. At 11:12 p.m., Daniel tried to leave. He stood from the bed and walked toward the door. On the video, he appears slow but ordinary, a frightened man crossing a small room in a few seconds. In Daniel's mind, that walk took most of a day. His bare feet rolled across the floor grain by grain. The handle waited ahead of him like a destination on a map. When his fingers finally closed around it, the door did not open. He pulled again. Locked. The realization did not hit him quickly. It unfolded. First confusion, then fear, then a long, cold understanding that nobody in the hallway was moving with him. They were all trapped on the other side of a different universe, watching a version of him that moved too fast for his suffering to look real. He hit the glass once. The staff saw a sudden slap. Daniel experienced the impact for close to an hour. Pain behaved differently from sound. Sound stretched until it disappeared. Pain stayed sharp. The nerves in his hands screamed in a steady, bright line. It did not fade when it should have. It sat there, glowing, while he stood in front of the glass and watched Mara's mouth slowly form his name. At midnight, the reaction deepened. The wall clock became an enemy. Daniel had been measuring his prison by it, trusting the second hand to prove that real time still existed. Then the second hand seemed to stop completely. It did not freeze. It moved so slowly that motion became a rumor. Daniel stared at the red plastic needle and waited for it to cross one mark. He waited through hunger. He waited through thirst. He waited through memories he had not touched since childhood. He remembered the smell of wet leaves outside his grandmother's trailer. He remembered a boy from school who used to hum while taking tests. He remembered every ceiling he had ever stared at during every sleepless night of his life. His mind searched for material, found all of it, burned through it, and started again. That was when the room started answering him. No one claimed the audio treatment caused hallucinations, but the recovered notes from the study mention auditory pattern completion. That was the clean phrase they used for something ugly. Daniel's brain, starved of change, began building company out of nothing. At first he heard footsteps behind the bed. There was nobody there. Then he heard a whisper inside the ventilation grate. The whisper did not use English. It used the rhythm of English, the shape of a sentence without words, and Daniel understood it anyway. It was asking him to look under the table. He refused for a very long time. The command repeated, "Look under the table, look under the table, look under the table." It did not become louder, it became older. Each repetition felt like it had been waiting in that room since before the building existed. At 12:46 a.m., Daniel bent down. The camera shows him lowering his head for less than 2 seconds. Daniel experienced a slow descent into darkness. The underside of the plastic table filled his vision. There, carved in the gray surface, hidden from anyone standing upright, were old marks. Not his marks, not fresh marks. Dozens of short scratches arranged into words. "Stay awake!" He almost laughed. Sleep was impossible. The warning was useless. Then he saw the second message, scratched farther back where the shadow was thicker. "When you sleep, it gets inside the paws." Daniel backed away so hard he fell. To the staff, it looked like he slipped and landed on his side. To Daniel, the fall lasted long enough for him to understand the full shape of terror. He had time to regret bending down. He had time to imagine the unknown participant who left that warning. He had time to wonder why Northline had sanded the table clean on top but never checked underneath. He had time to feel his shoulder twist beneath him and to wait for the pain to arrive. It arrived. The room went white. Mara demanded that Dr. Hale unlock the door. Hale said Daniel was still medically stable. Mara threatened to call 911 herself. Hale reminded her that every device in the lab recorded every action and that breaching protocol would end her career. Mara looked through the glass. Daniel was on the floor, staring at the underside of the table like it had spoken to him. Then the lights went out. The outage lasted 8 seconds. For Daniel, those 8 seconds were almost a month. No sound, no sight, no movement he could trust. His body lay on the floor, one shoulder burning, one cheek pressed to cold vinyl. In that black stretch, his brain did what terrified brains do. It filled the emptiness. He felt someone lying beside him, not touching him, not breathing, just present. Daniel could not turn his head fast enough to see it. He could only feel the weight of attention beside his face. Something in the darkness was aware of every thought he had before he finished having it. It did not speak at first. It waited until he had imagined every possible shape for it. Then it whispered in the same, almost language from the vent. It told him it lived between moments. It told him ordinary people passed over it too quickly to notice. It told him the sound treatment had slowed Daniel down enough to fall through the cracks. When the lights returned, Daniel was no longer trying to leave the room. He crawled to the table, took the marker, and began writing. The staff leaned toward the glass. Mara read the first complete sentence out loud. "There is someone in here with me. Dr. Hale said it was a hallucination." Daniel wrote the next line with shaking patience. "It knows when I blink." At 1:03 a.m., Daniel stopped blinking. The human eye cannot stay open forever. It burns. It waters. The body demands relief. Daniel understood that closing his eyes invited the darkness back, and the darkness had learned his shape. So he held them open. Tears crawled down his cheeks. His eyelids trembled. He stared at the observation window and watched the staff move like creatures trapped in amber. Mara put her palm against the glass. Daniel saw the gesture coming for a span that felt like an entire evening. Something about it kept him human. He focused on her hand. He counted the lines in her palm through the glass. He tried to write one more message. "Do not let me sleep." The marker ran dry halfway through the final word. At 1:22 a.m., Dr. Hale finally called for a sedative. That choice came too late, and it came from the wrong understanding. Hale still thought Daniel needed sleep. He thought sleep would reset the brain, break the panic loop, and bring the subject safely down. Mara argued against it. She pointed to the warning under the table. Hale told her to stop treating a disturbed patient like a ghost story. The sedative was prepared outside the room. Daniel saw the needle through the glass. He understood instantly. His whole body began to shake. He tried to stand, but the fall had injured his shoulder. He tried to scream, but his voice existed in a place nobody could hear. He dragged the plastic table toward the door, trying to block it, but the table moved with the terrible slowness of a funeral procession. Mara opened the door first. The pressure changed in the room. Daniel felt outside air roll over him like weather from another planet. He reached for her sleeve. She saw his fingers touch the fabric. Dr. Hale stepped in behind her. The injection took 1 second. Daniel lived inside that second for days. The needle entering his arm was not a prick. It was an event. Pressure, puncture, heat, chemical fire. He watched Mara shouting at Hale with a face full of horror. He watched Hale's expression change from irritation to doubt. He watched his own fingers loosen from Mara's sleeve. Then his eyelids began to close. Daniel fought them. He fought with every thought left in him. He remembered the warning. He remembered the presence beside him in the blackout. He remembered the sentence about the pause. His eyelids lowered anyway, heavy as garage doors, slow as winter. The room narrowed. The glass became a bright strip. Mara's face became a pale blur. The strip became a thread, then nothing. For everyone outside Daniel, the next 6 hours were quiet. He did not seize. He did not thrash. His vitals remained stable. Dr. Hale documented the sedation as successful. Mara refused to leave the observation window. At 3 a.m., she noticed Daniel's lips moving. At 3:30, they were still moving. At 4:10, she recorded the movement on her phone because the lab system audio showed nothing unusual. By dawn, Daniel was sitting upright in the bed with his eyes closed, lips moving in an endless whisper. The official report says he experienced a prolonged dissociative episode. That report leaves out the recovered audio. A forensic technician later stretched the room recording and found a voice underneath the ventilation hum. Daniel's voice. Slow, ruined, and exhausted beyond anything a person should survive. He was not dreaming. He was counting. He was counting years. Year 1, Year 2, Year 3. The count continued for 6 hours of real time. By the technician's estimate, Daniel experienced somewhere between 900 and 1,200 subjective years during the sedation window. That number is impossible to prove and impossible to forget. When Daniel woke at 7:31 a.m., his hair had not turned white. His body had not aged. His pulse was normal. His pupils responded to light. On paper, he was a living 34-year-old man who had spent one difficult night in a sleep lab. His mind had returned from a place where centuries could fit inside a morning. He did not speak for 20 minutes. Then he looked at Mara and asked whether the room was still moving. She said no. He said that was how it hunted. Northline closed the study before noon. Dr. Hale resigned 2 weeks later. The building owners claimed Room C was stripped, cleaned, and rented to another company within the year. That is the part of the story that should make people angry, because rooms remember what people do inside them. A room does not need blood on the floor to become contaminated. Sometimes a room is ruined by attention. Daniel never returned to his apartment. He moved in with his sister in Idaho and lived under 3 strict rules. No ticking clocks, no sleep medication, no silent rooms. His sister said he played rain sounds every night at full volume. He slept with the lights on. He kept a mirror facing the bedroom door, not because he believed in ghosts, but because he wanted proof that the dark behind him stayed empty when he blinked. For almost a year, he improved. He cooked breakfast. He took short walks. He answered simple questions. Then, one winter evening, his sister found him standing in the laundry room with his face inches from the dryer door. The machine was off. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator. Daniel was staring at his reflection in the black glass. He told her the seconds were getting wider again. That night, he wrote one final note. It was calm. The handwriting was steady. He said the thing from Room C had not followed him through space. It had followed him through time. It waited in pauses. It waited in the silent gap before sleep. It waited in the tiny black interval inside every blink. He ended the note with a warning, not for doctors, and not for people who run strange experiments in clean buildings with locked doors. He wrote it for anyone who has ever stared at a clock in the dark and felt 1 second last too long. Do not count it. Do not give it your attention, because attention is an invitation. Daniel Mercer disappeared 3 days later. There were no signs of forced entry. His shoes were by the bed. His phone was on the nightstand. Rain sounds were still playing from a speaker beside the lamp. The mirror facing the door had cracked from corner to corner, although nobody in the house heard it break. Police found one strange detail in the room. On the inside of Daniel's eyelids, visible only when the medical examiner lifted them, were tiny red marks. Not cuts, not tattoos. Marks made from broken capillaries, arranged too neatly to dismiss. 2 words appeared on the left eyelid, "Still here." 2 words appeared on the right, "Still waiting." That is where the case ends on paper. A missing man, a closed clinic, a few corrupted recordings, a table that was supposedly destroyed, a doctor who never gave interviews, a technician who quit medicine and moved somewhere with no clocks in her house. The case leaves one conclusion behind, and it is colder than any apparition in a hallway. Human beings trust time because it usually moves at a speed the mind can survive. Daniel's punishment was being forced to notice the machinery underneath it. Once he noticed, something noticed him back. So the next time a quiet room feels too quiet, the next time a second stretches just a little longer than it should, the next time sleep is almost there and the darkness behind the eyelids seems deeper than normal, there is one question worth asking. Is the silence empty, or has something finally found enough time to reach you?